Welcome back, and thank you. We're now about to begin with session 3 of the summit, titled Accelerating Growth Through Unlocking Trade and Investment. And I would now like to invite Mr. Huy Nguyen, Deputy General Director of the Hoa Sen Group, Vietnam, to share a presentation with you.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Huy Nguyen from Vietnam. I am the member of board of directors of the Hoa Sen Group, a steel mill in Vietnam. So I'm very happy today, and I would like to thank you your invitation, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Before sharing the Vietnam story with you, actually, I want to tell you that Vietnam also faced a similar challenge in the year 2011. At that time, Vietnam also had the problem like Sri Lanka today. We facing with the high inflation and the low foreign reserves. Exchange rate market fluctuation very sharply, and the Vietnam government purchase deficit is high. At that time, all the projects stopped or abandoned. That's why today, in my presentation, I would like to share with you how Vietnam, from the low developing country, now moving into the very important hub of the global supply chains. So I will Vietnam have now located in the Southeast Asia with the border with China from the north, and from the west side we have the border with Cambodia and Laos. On the east side, more than 2,000 kilometers, we have the border with the sea. I want to explain. This position is important, this location is important. China long time become the hub of manufacturing in global. So Vietnam have the bordering with China, so later we have the option of China +1. This is very supportive and very advanced when we start to encourage the investment from the foreign company. GDP in the year 2022 approximately around 366 billion US dollar. And then we have now nearly 100 million people. Okay. So you can see that for the last 10 years, even though the COVID happened, Vietnam FDI still keep stable. This is the number for the FDI new register. If combined together with the FDI for extension, yearly Vietnam can attract around 20 to 25 billion US dollar per year for FDI. The FDI investment comes mainly from the Asia country, Singapore, China, Korea, Hong Kong, Japan is the most invested in Vietnam currently. So that's why you can see that the story, the real story of Vietnam for the last 10 years is our GDP increase, sustainable, year by year, from around 214 billion US dollar per year in the year 2013, now become 409 billion in the year 2022. The same economy, export and import volume also increased sustainable. In the year 2013, total export and import volume around 263 billion US dollar. And then last year, we already reached 730 billion. We have the sustainable develop, growing every year. Oh, sorry. To have the such kind of sustainable development, I think that Vietnam government already applied a lot of strategy. But here I just want to mention the key point, important key point, to help Vietnam to avoid the crisis and continue develop for the last 10 years. First, this is the government created the legal framework. We issued the law of the corporate, issued the law for the FDI, incentive. This is important because that this is the basis to to guarantee, to confirm with all the investors that they are protected when they doing the business in Vietnam. They are protected when they invest in Vietnam. So, to make the people, investor, totally have the confidence from the government. Second, to invite, to encourage the investor from domestic and from the overseas, government give some of the incentive policy in the tax. Normally, when you invest in Vietnam, you can enjoy exemption, Euro tax of the corporate duty in the first 4 years, and 50% of the tax another 9 to 10 years. And then for the big project, government can support for the land exemption or for the land fee. Number 1 and number 2, I think that every country can do the same. However, I want to stress in number 3, number 4, and number 5. This makes something special. Economic diplomacy. This is what Vietnam definition. It means that all the Vietnam leaders, from the Prime Minister to the President, yearly visits the big conglomerate, big company in the world to invite them, to discuss directly with them, to give them all the offer, special offer, and invite them to come. I think if we don't offer them, especially, they never come. There's so many incentives from other countries. If it's not commitment from the top leader, everything no meaning. They can go to China, can go to India, go to Indonesia, Malaysia, or Thailand. So, from the top leader, yearly we have the meeting and discussion separately with the big company in the world. That's what we call the economic diplomacy. The second is the free trade. Now, Vietnam, we already signed sitting free trade together with the foreign partner. Maybe 2 more will come by next year. And then have the free trade, and we can easily develop infrastructure effectively. I will show some of the story how we proceed this strategy. You can see in the early 1993, Vietnam economy still be in the low developing country. So we start the FTA with ASEAN first. With the ASEAN, the FTA with ASEAN, we can open the markets to 500 million people. The condition and the standards of ASEAN somehow is very familiar with Vietnam economy. So we start FTA from the country or the partner, the similar level with Vietnam. After that, we start higher level. And finally, this year, we signed the FTA with ASEAN and China, ASEAN and India. We open the market with 1.8, 1.9 billion people. So this is the huge market. After that, we signed the FTA between ASEAN, Australia, and New Zealand. ASEAN, Japan, ASEAN, Korea. Last 2 years, we start to sign the contract with Europe. We have the FTA with Europe in the year 2020, and with the UK in 2021. And especially in the year 2019, Vietnam have the FTA with the country in the FTA CPTPP, Vietnam, and some of the Canada, Mexico, Peru, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. All the new FTA require very high standards, high conditions. So we choose from the low one to the high later. I think FTA make the difference. Without FTA, we cannot increase the trade, cannot increase the job, cannot increase the export, and then cannot increase the confidence of the investor. People come to Vietnam. They choose because they see the opportunity. They see the good destination to invest because they can enjoy a lot of benefits from the FTA Vietnam already signed. So when we can develop the trade, we can increase the export volume. We easy to develop infrastructure for logistics. That's why Vietnam, from the north, we have the big base of the port. In the south also, we have the big base for the export. Logistics in return is the most important point, again, supporting for the investment. With the low cost, logistic cost, we can easily to increase the competitiveness in the world. So I come back again this picture because I have the story here. What we call this the economic diplomacy. You know that in the year 2005, Vietnam government start to think about how to encourage, how to invite for the high-tech company to invest into Vietnam. Before that, we just mainly produce the primary product with the very low values, or mainly we export the raw material. So from the year 2005, we decide to shift from the low or primary product to high tech. At that time, we chose Samsung and Apple, but Apple not easy to invite. They are mainly focused for China. So the only one is Samsung. Our Prime Minister, our President come to Korea many times to offer very special. Whatever possible, we offer to Samsung. And then in the year 2008, Samsung started the first factory in Vietnam. Mean that today is 15 years from the time Samsung to invest. The reasons why I choose Samsung to tell you the story, Samsung is the big one. If don't have Samsung or don't have Apple or don't have the big company, the other not follow. If you can invite the big one come, I'm sure with you, the other company will follow. And now, today, in the north of Vietnam, nearby Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam, we have the Samsung facility create a job for 100,000 workers there. The revenue of Samsung Vietnam today approximately around 70 billion US dollar, and they export around 60 billion US dollar. After Samsung, the other come. LG, SK, Intel, they come. And I hope that some more will come. They don't come because of the Samsung, but they come because we already invite Samsung to come. Mean that Vietnam become the good destination for all the investment. So today, we can surely that every two smartphone in the world, one is produced in Vietnam by Samsung Vietnam. Yeah, I think before I finish my presentation about the Vietnam story, I would like to share with you our company. We are the Hoa Sen Group. We are the steel mill. The steel mill produce the roofing sheet for household, for factory, for the shopping mall or the mall. I want to share with you our company because we are the one who enjoy from the government policy. We enjoy a lot. We start from 20 years ago in the year 2001, 22 years ago, just a small shop, and now become the biggest steel sheet in Vietnam and Southeast Asia with capacity 2.5 million metric tons, and in the top 5 of Asia. How only from the small shop we developed to the biggest mill in Vietnam. It's owned from the government policy. First, we enjoy the advantage of the FTA for ASEAN. At that time, we can export to ASEAN with the 0% of the duty. And later, many FTAs were signed. Also the same. We can easy to fighting to compete with other companies in the world because of we can enjoy 0% exemption from our FTA. And then, when government encourages the investment, they give the land free, they give the incentive in the start, so we can easily get the big land to build the factory, to build the mill, and get the exemption of the tax. That's why we can enjoy this one to develop fast, very fast. Now we have 8,000 steps on our rope, and the sale volume yearly around $2 billion US. You can see that we take advantage of the Vietnam government policy. Easy, we develop, we build up 10 factories around the country within very short time. And then we also build up the system of the store around the country. Now we have more than 600 stores around the country to sell directly from the mill to the end user. And for the export now, thanks to the FDA, the government already signed, we can export to more than 87 countries around the world. Yearly now, we can export around 800 million US dollar to around 1 billion US dollar per year. So I think that if we talk about the policy, strategic policy of how to develop fast, there's so many policy. And I think that every country have the different of the background. So this is just for what Vietnam is doing. I hope that some information will be useful for Sri Lanka, but at the same time, we also happy to study this time how Sri Lanka can overcome. This may be the lesson we must study. So I would like to thank you a lot for your time, for listening. Again, thank you a lot for invitation, the Salon of Commerce. So my presentation is finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hui. Introducing the panelists for this session, we have joining us Mr. Hui, who we just heard from, joined by Mr. Krishan Balendra, Chairman, John Keells Holdings PLC, Dr. Parakrama Dissanayake, Deputy Chairman and Managing Director, Aitken Spence PLC, Mr. Vinod Hydramani, Chairman, Hydramani Group, Ms. Haja Alafifi, Chairperson and Managing Director, Unilever Sri Lanka, and Mr. Revan Vikramasuriya, Chief Operating Officer and Director Financial Services and Compliance, Colombo Port City Economic Commission. The session will be moderated by Mr. Shamindra Kulamanage, co-founder of Echelon Media. I welcome our panelists and moderator to the stage.
Check. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to see you here today. The panel and I have a formidable task because our topic is rather vast. It's economic growth, accelerated economic growth through unlocking trade and investment. To do justice to this, I think we have a formidable panel also. So no pressure to the panel. Let's see how we can do justice to this vast topic. The panel has already been introduced to you, but just in case you're unfamiliar with one or two of them, we have Vinod in the extreme corner there, Revan, Krishan Balendra, Parakrama Dissanayake, Mr. Hui, and Haja. You already have a faculty book with you, I think, so you can see their profiles. Here's how we will conduct this session. I think you already know how you can post questions so that you can participate from the get-go with this panel. At the outset, I will ask each of the panelists on the stage here, except for Mr. Hui, who has already spoken, to make opening remarks. I will suggest that you take maybe 2 or 3 minutes at most on those opening remarks. Afterwards, we would love to have you participate, your questions. I have some questions also I want to pose to the panel, and we will try to keep this as interactive as possible. With that, Vinod, shall we start with that end with opening remarks?
Thanks. It's always daunting to take the after lunch session, but I hope you're all energized after Mr. Hui's talk. It's incredible growth in 20 years, both in the country and the company he runs. I represent the apparel industry, which is the main business that our group is in, although we have diversified in Sri Lanka. We've been through a lot in the last 3 or 4 years with COVID and now the financial crisis. But, the industry's an age-old industry here, more than 40 years. And we've been dealing with international markets and international customers for a long, long time. We're also working in other countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Ethiopia, and now even Nicaragua. But I have to say that the expertise of logistics and the teams that we have here in Sri Lanka have a lot of experience. And one of the things I wanted to pose to the rest of the panel is that we're not leveraging on the expertise that we have in certain industries to grow like countries like Vietnam into other export industries. So as I said, I think there's a lot of opportunity and we should be looking at that. Thank you.
Ravan, please.
Good afternoon, and here representing the Colombo Port City Economic Commission. Just like to touch on the fact that in the spirit of accelerating growth, attracting investments into Sri Lanka, the Colombo Port City project is, I would say to date, Sri Lanka government's largest PPP project that they've ever embarked on. I would say going back prior to this, it was the Mahaveli project, and that is maybe 40, 60, or maybe 40, 60 years ago. And we all saw the success that created, the true transformation that created to the whole of Sri Lanka. If the Sri Lanka the Colombo Port City Economic Commission, with the support of the government, getting this project right, can result in taking Sri Lanka to the next phase of its development program. Hope to take you through the advantages and the benefits it has to offer during this discussion.
I think we'll talk about different sectors later, but one interesting takeaway, Mr. Hui kept referring to policy, and I think that's one area that we need to focus more on. With the crisis in particular, we've been talking a lot about improving foreign exchange earnings and exports, manufacturing in particular. I think it's important that we try to identify 1 or 2 industries where the country has some kind of advantage, develop a policy, see what is missing. For example, Mr. Hui's steel business, can that be replicated in Sri Lanka? Or is there something fundamentally missing in this country? And I think a lot of work needs to be done on the policy area. And once we do identify 1 or 2 areas that could work in Sri Lanka for exports in particular, it's important that we implement that policy well and that we are consistent over a period of time. I think one of the other things that stood out about Vietnam is that they have been very consistent over an extended period of time with their policies. So I think policy development, identifying a few industries, and then the economic diplomacy that he spoke about as well, going out there and finding the right multinational investors.
Thank you. Dr. Barakrama.
Thank you. Let me put my thoughts into context. As you will appreciate over the last few months, as a nation, we have been preoccupied in trying to address the twin deficit, the balance of payment and the fiscal deficit. But we need to also understand that what caused this twin deficit was the crisis of good governance. The crisis of good governance was the primary cause for this twin deficit. As a nation, are we trying to address this issue, the crisis of good governance? It's a question that I would like to ask. And a lot has been said, but I am of the view that we have to go a long way. And another area is about the expenditure. If you look at the expenditure during the first 4 months as a nation, it has gone up to 1.6 trillion. 1.6 trillion, that is from January to April this year, as against 1.1 trillion. So on the one hand, through revenue increases, through taxes, we are trying to burden the citizens of this nation on the one hand, but we need to also look at the expenditure as well. These are critical issues that as a nation, as a corporate, at times we don't say the right thing, but I think the corporates also have to look at saying the right thing in the interest of the nation. And with those brief comments, I will park my thoughts.
Thank you. Aja.
So for me, it's, I've been in Sri Lanka for 4 years. And for me to set up the context, I think the question I'd like to ask the audience, do we see Sri Lanka as the land of crisis? Or do we see Sri Lanka as the land of opportunity? Now, in my 4 years, I can tell you, I represent Unilever. We have delivered our best results ever recorded, be it on the top line, the bottom line, the consumer interests, or even on sustainability, digitization, community work. You know, it was the same 4 years of crisis. So I ask the audience, and I'd like to answer my question. It is a land of opportunity. 100% agree. The narrative we put in our mind make us take action which might subdue the growth. When we put a narrative out there that this is a land of opportunity, and as a nation, as here probably the GDP of the country is already sitting, we're gonna take this country forward. I really loved the Vietnamese example. They were very clear on 1, 2, 3. They've gone and done it. I think we can. Yes, there are macro indicators that are bad, but there are other macro indicators that are far, far improved versus the crisis. So really, that's my opening remark. Let's look at it as a land of opportunity.
Thank you. So we've had opening remarks. Please, I'll remind you again, it's your opportunity to also pose questions and participate. We've already got a few here. I will start this with some questions to the panel. Can I start with you, Revan? Revan Revan represents the Port City Economic Commission and not the developer. So we have to understand the distinction. There's a distinction between the two, right? Revan, you have a big task ahead of you. The Commission has a big task ahead of you because it is the primary driver. It is the Commission that will have to drive the investment into the port city, right? And you are closely connected with the government. You have appointed members from the government in the Commission. You also have certain regulatory powers within the precincts of the port city. How is the challenge looking like from where you are today, given the context in which we are operating?
Thank you. Very thought-provoking question. And yes, one would say all eyes on the Colombo port city. This project, which sort of commenced, I would say, in 2015 or possibly earlier, has seen various stages of stops and starts. But finally, in 2021, a piece of legislation was passed in May, which created or gave rise to the Colombo Port City Economic Commission. and empowered it to administer the 2.69 square kilometers of land which has been annexed to the Colombo district. So I need to be very clear, this is a part of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's 60,000 square kilometers has now been increased by 2.6 square kilometers. In August 2019, a gazette was passed that actually annexed this and increased the Colombo district's land area by 2.6 kilometers. If we have elections next year, hopefully we'll even have a polling booth there. So this is clearly the government's most important piece of land that they need to try and monetize. The project company, as they touched on, happens to be a Chinese developer that did the land reclamation. Their job, on the back of approximately $1.4 billion of foreign direct investment, is coming to a closure. So we expect in the next year or two, their activities or their responsibilities, which is the the horizontal construction would be completed. The next phase is the launch of the vertical constructions to commence the buildings coming up. We are looking at now, the Commission's mandate now is to engage with investors from all walks of life, all parts of the world, to entice them, to attract them, to come in and lease any one of the 74 plots of land to build and start creating the city. I think, as Mr. Hugh mentioned, when you looked at the FDI numbers, one realized, I think about 60% of the FDI came from Vietnam's neighbors, China, Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore. Right? I think this is where it wasn't Europe, it wasn't North America, it wasn't South America, it wasn't even India. It was Vietnam's very close by neighbors. And I think this is what Sri Lanka needs to now look at. Look at our neighbors, India by far being the largest out of them, maybe Bangladesh, maybe Pakistan, right? Maybe the Middle East, and then if we can go out further to Singapore. How can we create the infrastructure, create the pieces of legislation to start attracting investors? The Commission has come a long way. We've created the first piece of regulation or legislation that grants the incentives to attract businesses, as again, coming up from what Vietnam did. We have now a few more pieces to the puzzle that needs to be implemented, right? And I would speak to quickly three of them. One being is to attract foreigners to invest, we need to actually create the framework for visas, right? We are working very closely with the Department of Immigration to come up with a visa framework that would be entitling employees, businesses, visas from 5 years or going up to even 10 years to establish their businesses. The next piece is the banking framework. Right, we need to give assurances to businesses that establish themselves here, the flexibility or the assurances that the revenue they generate, which is going to be in foreign currency, by providing services to companies overseas, that when that money comes in, it's not going to get trapped, it's not going to be restricted from repatriation, or it's not going to be mandatorily converted into Sri Lankan rupees. On this aspect, we are working very closely with the central bank to actually come out and create the frameworks that are necessary to address those concerns. The other piece of the puzzle is labor. The port city is looking to attract regional, global businesses to come in and relocate their offices here. Bring in the officers they are having in Dubai. Bring in the officers that are in Singapore. Again, on Vietnam, they spoke to China +1. Shouldn't we be India +1, right? The businesses looking to expand in India from the tier 1 cities to the tier 2 cities, can they relocate? Is the Colombo port city a value proposition? Now, on that aspect, we need to address a few areas in terms of labor, on the labor aspect. How do you treat when employees come from overseas? earning in dollars, providing services to people overseas, where does their retirement benefits, EPF, ETF, gratuity, etc. sit in? On this aspect, we are working very closely with the Ministry of Labor to try and see how you can address that. So once we address these three pieces of the puzzle, we believe the port city would be a huge value proposition to attract FDI into this country.
Quick follow-up. So you're flagging three things that you need clarity on from the government. Labor, how the labor law applies to the precincts of the port city, the banking regulations, and also the employment visas, right? I'll pick on the banking regulations. Before the recent economic crisis, Revan, and that led to several restrictions on repatriating dollars and enforced convertibility of dollars that were lying in Sri Lankan accounts. Was this a concern, or is this something that sort of popped up onto the radar after the issues of the recent past?
Yeah, very short summarize, yes it was, and we've seen a lot of businesses have faced these concerns, and businesses that have been working with the BOI and various other industries for over 40 years have faced various concerns, and now this is a concern that's being highlighted by new investors looking to come and establish their offices here.
Right. I have a question from the audience here. How important are tax incentives versus factor and regulatory investment improvements for exports in Sri Lanka? Tax incentives versus factor and regulatory improvements. Can I start with you, Vinod? You're an exporter. Which would you rather have?
You know, I think it's all about a level playing field. You know, if we look at, again, using Vietnam as an example, I mean, the tax structure is a little more favorable at the moment there than it is here. But what the government provides there is the proper infrastructure, proper entry mechanisms and exit mechanisms, and they've allowed their apparel industry to flourish. We have most of the top 10 players in our industry investing continually in Vietnam, and more so in the backward integration. So we've seen a much bigger emphasis there on the backward integration in terms of yarn and textiles. And, you know, Sri Lanka, in terms of scale, will never be able to compete directly with the likes of Vietnam or Bangladesh. But I think if we get our policies right, then taxes are not so important, to be honest with you.
Just to understand, your company has invested in Vietnam?
Yes.
Right. Can you contrast for us what are the advantages Vietnam offers and what's good about being invested in Sri Lanka? You know, are there goods and bads on both sides? Can you contrast the two?
Yeah, so as I mentioned briefly, obviously with the scale of population in Vietnam, to scale up there is a little easier than here. So, you know, our average factories here are about, you know, 2,000 or 3,000 people, whereas in Vietnam you can go much larger. But in terms of Sri Lanka's sustainability track record, particularly with European customers, we're streets ahead, right? So in terms of sustainability and you know, the ESG side, I think, not that Vietnam's bad, but I think we've created a name for ourselves. So as I said, you know, each market has its pluses and minuses. Taxes now and incentives are not the only thing. Customers are looking for companies like ourselves to be multi-country post-COVID so that their risks in each country are measured. And we all, as global players, we all have to act as they want.
Krishan, can I bring you in on the same question, which is how important are tax incentives versus factor and regulatory improvements?
I think there's a lot of discussion, especially now in the context of the IMF program and the need to increase revenues, and a lot of discussion about existing and tax incentives on new projects going forward. I think what is important again goes back to it's industry specific and country specific. While all three factors that you mentioned are important, finally, if you are looking at, say, the steel opportunity, Mr. Hui's business, and we want to set up a similar steel business in Sri Lanka, there'll be certain areas possibly that we have an advantage over Vietnam, and there'll be certain areas where we don't. But if you take everything together, will it require that one extra step of giving a tax incentive to attract an investor away from Vietnam to Sri Lanka? So I think you have to look at all these drivers and see whether Sri Lanka needs to give a tax incentive for a particular industry and a particular investment.
Dr. Barakrama, can I bring you in on the same question? Where do you stand on tax incentives versus, I mean, it's not either or, but if you had to choose between tax incentives versus more efficient factors of production, where would you land, do you think?
Now, I would say that, Aiken Spence, we are in 10 countries. And we keep on talking about FDI all the time, but we are not looking at how do we prevent Sri Lankan companies going overseas. So that's one is obviously the tax. Definitely the tax comes in, and there are three factors that impedes production of goods and services in Sri Lanka as of today. One is the tax, and number two is the cost escalation, tremendous cost escalation, electricity, you name it, and finding labor, the right skills. People are leaving. If you look at the first 6 months of this year, 140,000 people, registered people have left Sri Lanka. And these are millennials and Gen Z, those who are critically required to run businesses efficiently and effectively. So Sri Lankan companies, whilst we want to invest in Sri Lanka, I will tell you about that later on, which we are doing. But since we are in 10 countries, we'll look at options there as well. Thank you.
Assume we see the worst of this crisis off in another 2 years and we are not so much under pressure as we are now. What would your competitive tax rate for corporation tax be? Now it's 30%. What do you think it could be? Should be?
Last, we were also some industries we were getting 14, some 24. And so obviously that should be in that region, between 14 to 24. But we are willing to stomach the increases. We are willing to ensure that our profit levels come down for the sake of creating wealth in Sri Lanka. But we should also ensure, as I said in my opening remarks, the expenditure, the nation's expenditure also has to come down.
Right. Mr. Hui, can I bring you in here, right? You've invested tremendously behind Vietnam, right? Or you have 10 factories in Vietnam, all of them based in Vietnam. What role have taxes or low corporation tax rates played in your decision to invest in Vietnam?
Actually, before to answer your questions, I want to share my idea. Yeah, sometimes some people say that tax exemption is the loss for the government purchase. But however, let's think about 4 years, 5 years, 10 years later, what we can earn. We can create the shop, we can create the trade, we can create the environment, the confidence for all the people. So tax exemption first 2 or 4 years, very small. This is what we call is the government investment for the corporates. And today I surprised, sorry, but corporate tax in Sri Lanka too much high. Seem around 24%. Vietnam reduced from 25 to 20, and then now we try to reduce from 20 to 18. And then we reduce the VAT tax from 10 to 8 to encourage the consumption and then encourage the investment. So I think in sustainable development, government must think that tax is the kind of investment. Invest for more investment mean that later in the future, you can collect more than what you already get.
Sure. Haja, can I bring you in? You know, your business is such that I think you feel the pulse of the consumer very much. I mean, I'm sure it shifts dramatically when there are small changes, right? And when we were discussing prior, to coming on stage, you were talking about several concerns you had about what's going to unfold now. Can you tell us about how you're looking at the changing fiscal landscape in Sri Lanka? I mean, taxes are about to change in 2024 again.
So because I have a different point of view to the panel on the tax, I'd like to put that forward. Firstly, we should not be sitting in a cuckoo land because we are under an IMF project. So our obedience to the tax is important. And yes, there will be a crunch. And for the companies that are here, our job is actually to support that stability, because otherwise we will be creating another crisis and we will never stabilize the country. The question to me is not about tax. The question is about, for the corporation, then I'll come to the consumer if I may. The question for me is the ease of doing business versus the cost of doing business. And if that balance strikes, and actually, Vinod, you're right, every country has the positive and the negative, but if you see that a country has a degree of ease of doing business from regulation, integrity, lack of bad methods, etc., though the cost might be high, you would still invest because you're investing as an investor in stability of policy, in longer term. And actually, the best time to actually invest in Sri Lanka is now, because in 10 years, it's going to reap you a huge ROI. So I think that's just my stance, is to look at it from ease and cost, and I think that's what Vietnam has done. They first said free trade agreements, now they're going into increasing consumption, so it's a build strategy. Now coming to the reality of our lives. As Unilever, we've been in the country for 85 years, and we serve the consumer. After the crisis, poverty has doubled, unemployment has skyrocketed. And we guys sitting in Shangri-La, we don't really know what's happening with our consumers. They have even cut on their meals. They're eating less. They cannot afford, what they used to do in the past in terms of even school fees, let alone electricity fees, etc. This is the reality of the Sri Lankan consumer. I like growth. And I think the narrative has to be on shifting the economy to growth. Now, who drives growth? It is the consumer that goes and consumes and therefore makes the factory work, therefore makes supply chain work, therefore makes the investor come. At the end, it is us, the Sri Lankan, that makes that bet. And for me, what we need to do to stimulate the growth will give us the fiscal policies as a consequence. So 3 things to stimulate the Sri Lankan consumer to buy back. First, I really applaud the initiative of at least 5,000 rupee, but it's a start that's going to be given by April to the needy. And I think my plea is to do it twice or thrice, because that will stimulate the affordability. We know prices have come down, so we know the access is better. And we know that the banks have now reduced the interest rate on credit cards so that the consumer can start spending. I think when that wheel starts oiled again, though the fiscal policy in percentage might be high, your cash is going to increase, and that will give us a virtuous cycle of growth. So I really wanted to come at it differently, because I think P&L starts from the top, doesn't start from the bottom. Everything starts with growth. And when we unlock the top, the bottom will follow.
Haja, I don't expect you to comment about Unilever in particular, but you made an interesting point about ease of doing business versus the cost of doing business. You've had an international career within the organization. You've seen where it's easier to do business and where it's low cost to do business. In your experience, where does Sri Lanka rank? Are we still struggling with ease of doing business?
This is the question where you lose, like the very unpolitical question. I really think that what we need to move as a country is the ease of doing business. Because the one thing that I'd like to see Sri Lanka improve on is the regulations that could be changing like overnight, the surprise that could come. But across my 4 years, I need to say that it has really moved. And this is not because I'm sitting in this panel, but I do believe that the Chamber of Commerce has played a massive role to explain to the government the importance of stability of regulation, the importance of stability of policies. We need to acknowledge that last year there were 60 new regulations that were given for the first 3 months to Sri Lanka, more than South Asia all put together. But this year, we only had that tax news, but it's 1 versus 60. So I see a huge shift on ease of doing business. For me, the cost of doing business, honestly, Sri Lanka is a sovereign country. So we have to respect what the central bank believes is right. And I think we fare pretty well if you look at the other countries that I have visited, but that's my humble opinion.
All right, since I put Parakram on the spot on what, on his opinion about what the corporate tax rate should be, may I also ask Vinod and Krishan here. Obviously, we have to see this crisis through. We cannot potentially be tinkering with the corporate tax rates because that would lose us the support of the IMF and the stability we have earned. But in the long term, Vinod.
No, to echo what Mr. Hui said, obviously, if we want to grow the export basket and get the likes of a Samsung or even Samsung supply into the country, we will have to look at, some sort of incentives, whether it be a lower tax rate for exporters to come in. I don't want to put a figure to it because that's unfair in the situation we're in, but I would agree that, what Mr. Hughes said, I would echo.
Nothing really to add to what Vinod said. It's not about putting a figure of a tax rate. It's about everything else: cost of labor, cost of electricity, infrastructure, ease of doing business. What are other countries doing? So if you're going to get, whether it's Samsung or some steel business to set up in Sri Lanka, do we need to give lower taxes to attract them, or do we have other advantages that doesn't require that? So I think I can't really say 30% should be less or more. It's really about so many other drivers.
Parakrama, can I bring you in on something, because we can easily forget or overlook the fact that you have about 20 years of experience working in the public sector also. And in that time, potentially you've sort of formed an opinion about what ails the public sector. Sri Lanka is trying to reform its state-owned enterprises. We have a particular strategy about it. We are looking at divesting several of them that are in non-core areas, so taking the government out of business that is competing with the private sector, and we are dealing with others in different ways. Any thoughts about the current process, and coming from the view that you've had of the public sector when you were there?
Thanks for that question. Now, when you talk about ailing SOEs, state-owned enterprises, the stock answer is lock, stock and barrel, privatize. That has been the view taken by the governments throughout the years. Now, if you look at Sri Lankan Airlines with a debt going up to about 1.2 billion, obviously you have no choice but to privatize. But having said that, in the year 2001, I'm sure some of you will understand, when the airport came under attack, in 2001, shipping lines imposed an additional war risk premium on ships calling the Colombo. So in 2001, the nation woke up and realized that we were living in an island without a ship. We didn't have a single ship to transport food. They realized overnight. But then what happened subsequently was that Ceylon Shipping Corporation ended up buying 2 coal ships. So that's a different story altogether. Having said that, the critical issue is in state-owned enterprises is that having right people in right places. What we have and what we had all the years is having square pegs in round holes. I can tell you, during the Yahapalana regime, there was a cabinet decision to bring in qualified experts into various sectors, but that was unfortunately observed in the breach. And the Port of Colombo, you will not have a port which is amongst the 25 best ports in the world, if not for Sri Lanka Ports Authority. The Colombo South Harbour investment, which is $500 million, you think the private sector would have invested? If SLPA was privatized? That was a sunk cost, if not for the investment Sri Lanka Ports Authority made on the sunk cost of the South Harbour breakwater, you would not see a Port of Colombo to this extent. And I can also tell you, Krishan is here, there have been some instances, I'm bringing in the port example, that in the year 2003, the shareholders of SAGT now, which is driven by John Keels, Maersk and Evergreen chose to support SLPA-driven Jaya container terminals. So my answer to your question is that we need to carefully look at SOEs. You may need to have control. Remember, Singapore and Dubai was driven by state-owned enterprises. Take Singapore Airlines, take the PSA, take the DP World. They were all driven by the state-owned enterprises with the right management. So the panacea to the ills of the state-owned enterprises is not necessarily privatization, but having the right management. And you need to have proper public-private partnerships. And I can tell you, we are overseas, having so many public-private partnerships, and the state sector is actively involved with us in managing the public-private partnerships overseas. Thank you.
Krishan, I have to bring you in because you are possibly the largest private sector Sri Lankan investor in the port sector. Parakram expressed a view about his view about how about the state's role in setting up Sri Lankan ports. How do you think we should delineate this? How should we navigate as a policy our approach to the sector, the regulatory aspects, the operational aspects, the investment aspects? There are several factors here, right? You are an investor and an operator of ports, but there's regulation, there's ownership also. How should we navigate this?
I think there are enough examples of how it can be navigated. Taking Para's example of the SLPA investing in the superstructure, yes, at the time that was an excellent decision, and if it was left to private investors, you may not have attracted the investment to put up the breakwater, especially in the context of the country environment with the ongoing war at the time. So the fact that the government had to step up, or the SLPA had to step up and do that, made a difference. Regulation, yes, it has to be done by the government, but even a superstructure like what the SLPA built, in the right environment, you could have a private investor investing in that as well, if they are given a concession to build 1 or 2 terminals in that superstructure. So now in the South Harbour superstructure, you can have 4 container terminals. So you could have got a private investor to fund the $500 million for the superstructure and given them a concession for, say, 2 of the 4 terminals and bidded out the other 2. So there are different ways of doing it, but I agree and completely with Para that at the time, what made a big difference that the SLPA stepped up, they got the expertise, they found the funding, and they did it. And the Colombo port is what it is today because it was done then. But there are different models.
It happened a long time ago, but I believe John Keels was deeply interested back then to develop the Colombo South Port on a model that you're kind of suggesting right now. So the money was potentially available even back then.
No, not to build the superstructure, actually, yeah, not to fund the entire superstructure. Because if it was one concession of a 1 terminal plus the entire superstructure, it may not have been feasible.
What if you had two container concessions?
Yeah, possibly, but it would have been at the time a very large investment for Sri Lanka. So whether, given the macro context then, whether that was possible 20 years ago.
Right. Vinod, I'll bring you in. We'll slightly change topics here and talk about the industry you're in. You're in manufacturing. It's a labor-intensive industry, particularly manufacturing garments. So I suppose the abundance of labor and their concentration in a certain area really matters to you. You talked about how your factories here are 2,000 people versus 10,000 elsewhere, right? Broadly, what's the future of the type of manufacturing that you're doing in Sri Lanka, like from where we are currently? You know, because is there a danger that this kind of manufacturing has a clock ticking in Sri Lanka?
I think simply put, we have to put the business where the labor is. Historically, if I look at my career, you know, we started having, you know, when I joined, our original factories were in Maragama. And then when I joined the business, then President Premadasa started the 200 garment factory scheme. I don't know if a lot of guys remember, where we were asked to put factories all over the country. And in fact, my first job was in a factory in Aligura, which is about 2 hours outside Colombo. And then as our company grew, we kind of realized that it was important to be, you know, where, as I said, where the labor is. So now we have factories in Jaffna, Vaunia, and many different parts of the country. So to your question, I think we as employers have to go to where the labor is. We still see a very bright future for the industry in Sri Lanka, even though recently you guys may have heard about, you know, the downturn in the order situation. I think it will come back. I have full faith in our industry and the entrepreneurs that run the businesses. We will announce a very large investment in the supply chain, because it's something we realized during COVID, that our supply chains were very fragile. And in order to strengthen our business in Sri Lanka, we will be continually investing in the supply chain here. Thanks.
I've got to remind the audience of a couple of things. I think there's a poll out there. You can vote for this on Slido. And also, we'd like you to participate more. You can certainly put your questions in. There's some I have here. We'll take them on as we go. So those two things, interact with the poll and also post more questions. I'm going to follow that up, Vinod, right? How critical a factor when you decide to invest? You suggested that there is an upcoming announcement of a large investment to strengthen the supply chain. I presume that is in Sri Lanka, right? But you have to, you know, look at your long-term investment pipeline and decide where you're going to put the money. How critical a factor is labor right now, and the availability and the cost of it in Sri Lanka?
So the investment we're making is not as labor intensive as the garment factory itself, but with the type of brands that we are attracting to Sri Lanka, the likes of the Patagonias of the world or some of the other sustainable brands, I think we have to look to the future. You know, we're a 100-year-old company, but the average age of our board is 42, so we kind of think we're a young startup. It's a very bold move, I have to be honest with you. It's a very bold move to make this. It's millions of dollars in investment, but we've thought about this carefully. And, you know, we're big believers in Sri Lanka. And as I said, with the type of brands that we're working with here in Sri Lanka, it will only add to what we can provide them in terms of service.
Raman, the Colombo Port City and the Economic Commission of which you are part of is not in the manufacturing area. It's on the other side. It's a special economic zone that will thrive based on services, right? You had an expectation. I suppose there was a vision when you set this up. And you've highlighted for us 3 challenges that you need to overcome in the short term. The one regarding banking and foreign exchange, the one regarding visas for expat workers, and another around the labor laws. But this is the short term. I ask you to take a step back and look at the long term. You know, you have to generate several $billion of investments, I think, over the next few years to justify the money that has been sunk by the developer and the concession that the government has awarded to the developer and the commission. What's looking good right now and what's challenging?
I think, so the Commission is looking at the short-term actions that are needed, which we alluded to, but on a more long-term basis, right, what is clearly needed is stability in policy, right? And I think Parakrama spoke about privatizations of SOEs. We're sitting here, we've seen during various governments a number of businesses that were brought in under private management having been reversed when governments have changed, right? I think this is a big concern that investors are having, especially when investors come in from overseas, right? This is a state-owned asset, the Colombo Port City, right? It is a lease from the government for 99 years that would be given to any potential investor where they come from overseas. The Act actually requires investment capital to be brought from overseas. So you can't go in and tap into the banking system here to start the vertical constructions. So I think what is critical is over the long term, and I would say, when I say long term, I would even say medium term, I would say the next 2 years or the 5-year period, is to give assurances to investors that policy stability is going to be there. You're not going to have a situation, we're talking about Sri Lankan Airlines privatized, who's to say 2 years later, it's not reversed, right? So I think this is what the government needs to come out and make it very, very clear that the businesses that attract or the investment that comes into the port city, you sign a 99-year lease, they spend in the tens of hundreds of millions of dollars, that consistency would be there. I think that is a very, very key message the government needs to get out.
Just to make a comment, in fact, I must admit that the BOI and the Port City Commission, the leadership team led by the chairman has been extremely proactive. We have had some engagements with them as well. My question to some of the statements that he made was, in the year 2011, the government at that time, they brought in an act on the pretext of revival of underperforming businesses. That was in 2011. And they took over, as you right said about Sri Lankan that could happen, was they took over the Palavatta, Sevanagala, and also, I believe, the owning company of the Hilton. Through this Parliamentary Act of 2000, on the pretext of revival of underperforming businesses. Now, this act was repealed in the year 2019. But are you not looking at coming up with a comprehensive act, a parliamentary act, to provide protection to new investments? I'm not sure whether the chamber has raised this with the government as well. So my question is to you. Do you have any idea?
I think, as much as I'm a part of the government, I'm not the government. But I think that is, again, the chamber, I believe, is maybe or may not be looking at it. But I know there is discussions in terms of the BOI, the EDB, even the Colombo Port City. The government is clearly looking at bringing in one framework to actually drive Sri Lanka. Invest Sri Lanka is the catchphrase. What needs to be done to address the broader concerns, which are nothing new. We're not reinventing the wheel here, right? And I think that is something the government is looking at, and hopefully would see regulations or legislation come out in the near future.
Maybe if I may come on this one, if we have time, do it. I think policy stability is the key. Now let's be clear. There's no country that gives you policy stability forever, right? For example, I'll speak of our company at Unilever. We've just invested in a new factory at 10 million euro at this stage. And every year we invest capex to the magnitude of about 2 to 3 million euro. Yeah? If policy changes, that means I cannot even write off my machinery, right? So I've done a bad investment. However, next to policy stability, which may be 3-5 years, what is important is consultation. It's stakeholder, it's a seat at the table. And I think that's the role of the chamber. I don't think we can go and say, let's put stability to policy forever and 20 years, no change of tax. But what we can say is that private can only go forward if it goes together with discussion and really putting the right people at the table and giving them, let's say, 6 months, 9 months to adjust. Because what we don't want is the surprises, is applying stuff overnight, because that investors don't like at all. And I think this is where the port city can play a role. So I just wanted to give that 1 minute spiel. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Can I ask this question of Revan and also you two gentlemen? I mean, it looks like Sri Lanka's past track record is now hurting us with the economic crisis, the actions the government took as a result of the economic crisis, and also going back all the way to, the law that took over several state private sector businesses. Those included what is now known as the Hyatt building, the exhibition and convention center also, right? If you had to advise the government, let's start with you, Revan, how do you start advising them on building back credibility? Given we've also had an economic crisis that led to fairly questionable decision making around policy stability.
I think I think you hit the nail on the head. Building credibility, right? And that when you talk about government, the beauty of Sri Lanka is we are a democracy. Every 5 years, 6 years, governments can and will change, right? Yes, you would have, whether you're left or right or center, governments have different policies, right? But that is how countries evolve. America, you have the left and the right. What is important is for who comes in as a government to actually implement what they said they were going to before they actually, or during the campaign season, right? Sometimes you have situations, and how much of government policy, the rhetoric that comes out before elections is actually implemented after elections, right? And that is where credibility comes in. We've seen governments change because the people believe that what the government or the politicians said before the vote is very different to what they did when they actually come in, and that comes down to credibility. And that's what I think needs to be driven. That's what government needs to address is be credible, be true to the people when they go out there and ask for the vote.
So, you are at the receiving end of this, right? At some point, a government came along and said they will renegotiate the Port City deal, and you had to abandon, the development company had to abandon construction for a long time. What if you contrast this with the approach of, hey, if you have big projects, that you try to keep that consistency? Revan, you were, the Port City the Economic Commission didn't exist. It was the developer company that existed at that point, right? And construction was stopped for over a year. Perhaps we should, I propose to you, and I'm pitching the idea to you that, hey, sure, what you have said something on a political platform, but then on big projects to have seesawing, yo-yoing policy is not very useful.
As I said, as you rightly touched on it, I wasn't there, the commission wasn't there, right? One needs to go back and see why the project was put on hold, right? How the project was awarded, right? So you would question, or the government that put it on hold would actually question the way the project was awarded, right? And then that comes to transparency, right? When you're awarding the project, right? Whatever it is, when you're awarding a piece of land, right? And this is what the IMF governance or diagnostic report also spoke about, right? Having that transparency, right? So the more you come up with a transparent, or the more the government comes out with a transparent process of awarding an asset, divesting something, the less the chances of that being reversed or being stopped or stalled. So I think at the crux of this is, it all comes down to transparency.
Transparency and governance. Krishan, where we are, let's look forward. If we have a credibility gap, how do we start building this? What is the role that the chamber and the private sector also can play?
I think it will take time to rebuild confidence, but one specific thing that we could go back to, and it's suspended for the moment, is the process of large investments being approved by Parliament through the SDP process. So, it's not only the Underperforming Enterprises Act where we saw acquisition, but we also saw some privatizations being reversed in the 2000s through a court process. And so the SDP process was brought in not just for the tax concessions, and today it's being reviewed because of the tax concessions, but it also gave a parliamentary approval for a project. So it went beyond just approval by the Board of Investment and by the executive, but also approval by Parliament, which was a further overarching approval. So I think while we can review the tax concessions, and that's fine, it's important for the bigger investments that we look at the SDP process as protection. And so that is one example, one way of doing it, and I think we have to do something like that. And apart from that, consistent policy over a few years will help to rebuild confidence.
Aja.
I think I echo exactly what you have said, and I will add, moving forward. See, we started this conversation by growth, then we spoke of tax, and we all went to ease of doing business, right? Stability policy, stakeholder management. Then we said, moving forward, I really think digitization, it's very easy to do, but difficult to adopt. So easy to do because we have great IT infrastructure. It will help clean the system. It will bring transparency. It will cut through corruption, etc. And I think this is a low-hanging fruit. Second low-hanging fruit, all EU countries want sustainable businesses, want to invest or import from countries that have full ESG, transparency, auditing, etc. I think that also is a very low-hanging fruit which we can make Sri Lanka very known of. And lastly, we need to stop the brain drain. The best talents are leaving Sri Lanka, so we need to put programs for these Sri Lankans to come back. I think most of them, they go to London and they think everything is rosy. After 6 months, they become depressed and they come back. So they will come back. But these are three things, I think: digitization, the green, and really high-end talent.
Yes, please come in.
The quest of transparency, I think Krishan briefly touched. Now we are going through reforms. And state-owned enterprises, I can see EOIs have been called, and I can only hope, I wish Suresh was there, and I'm sure we are going through the right procurement guidelines. We are all aware of what happened in early 2004-05. 3 privatizations were overturned, which went through transparent processes, but they were not in line with the procurement guidelines. We have a blue book called the Procurement Guidelines. I'm hoping that they're going through that process. We had the Sri Lankan Insurance Corporation, LMS, John Keels, that was John Keels, and the Water's Edge. The Supreme Court overturned the privatization process. This is just a comment. So the transparency is so critical, transparency and accountability. Thanks.
Also a reminder to you, your last chance, I think we are like 20 minutes more to go. So please do post any questions that you have for the panel soon. We have a few. Revan, there's a few that sort of potentially you are best placed to take on. When can we expect the banking regulations framework to be finalized with regards to the Colombo port city, and will offshore accounts be operationalized?
Yeah, the banking, the vision for the banking business as carved out in the Colombo Port City Economic Commission Act, if you threw that out a year ago, various people had various ideas about it. I remember sitting with the IMF at the end of 2021 when they had come in for the Article 4 review. They said, oh, this is going to be a den of laundering money. Right? So we had to go through that and clearly articulate that that is not the case, right? So there have been discussions being held. We're working very closely with the central bank. They've set up a working committee, and it's very clear that, first of all, the FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, is going to have oversight of all regulated businesses that would be operating within the Colombo Port City. So if it's a bank, if it is a stockbroker, if it is a casino, because a gem trader, whatever it is, because the FIU has oversight of, I think, 8 or 10 different types of businesses. The banking is being reviewed, the frameworks are being looked at. We would like to see this in place possibly within the next 2 months or possibly early 2024, because this is very critical. I would say the most critical piece of regulation that the businesses are all looking at and waiting for before they venture out and start their business activity in the port city.
So for context, there is already a law which has operationalized the Port City Economic Commission where you sit, and this is an additional law that would make Sri Lanka a financial center of sort, like say Dubai or Singapore.
So I wouldn't call it a law, it is a regulation that would be passed under the law, the legislation or the law, which is the Colombo Port City Economic Commission Act. And for banking business, this regulation would be passed in consultation with the Ministry of Finance and the, not the monetary board, the governing board, as is the case currently.
And you say you expect these regulations to be in place in about 2 months. You would like to see it in place in about 2 months, okay. What does it take to create a financial center once you have the regulations in place? What does it take?
I think we've got many very experienced bankers here, and they would all, I hope they would all agree, before a financial center comes in, you need to have businesses actually doing various business activities, whether it's retail, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's heavy industry, diversified conglomerates. So you need to actually attract businesses, real businesses, right, to put boots on the ground and start doing various activities, whether it's tourism, trade, logistics, shipping, investments, etc. And then on the back of that, when a financial institution sees the opportunity and sees the business activity happening in a certain jurisdiction, then you would expect to see the financial institutions sort of come in there and start providing the necessary services for the real sector to actually thrive and grow.
Shall we slightly switch topics? Krishan, I'll bring you in. It is being highlighted at often in public forums, also by comments with the government, that the potential, underlying potential of tourism in Sri Lanka. This is a large area of business for John Keel's holdings. I think if we do nothing, still the tourists will come, right? But that's not the sort of ideal situation. That's not the best way to optimize the assets and gain the right yields. What is Sri Lanka doing well in this area, and what should we be doing better with to maximize the opportunity around tourism?
I think you're right in saying that the tourists will come. The peak year was 2018, where we had 2.3 million tourists. That was a big growth during the war. We got 200,000 to 300,000 tourists a year. Then from 2009, that grew to 2.3 million. But 2.3 million is still a very small number. The small island of Bali, just prior to COVID 2019, got, I think, 7 million foreign tourists. Vietnam had 17 million. Malaysia is 25 million. So we have a long way to go, and the numbers will come, but we can accelerate that. And one thing that as an industry we have been asking for since the end of the war is for a global promotion campaign similar to what Malaysia has done, with India has done, and so many other Asian countries. And we have not managed to do that in 10 years. We've seen ministers changing, chairpersons of the tourist board changing, governments changing, so we've not had a proper global promotion campaign. But I would look at two aspects to this. One is the resort tourism potential, and the other is Colombo as a destination as well. We should just pick one market, pick India. That's all we need to do. Revan spoke about India as the opportunity for the port city, but tourism, it's just enormous. If you look at the way the Chinese have over the last 20 years flooded into their neighboring countries, Sri Lanka is just sitting there 1 to 3 hours away, and we have not done an extensive, properly planned out promotion even in India. And people in India mentioned that there's Thailand, China, Malaysia, so many other countries actively promoting their countries as tourist destinations. So I think one thing we can accelerate it significantly, and that is by having proper campaigns.
You and Aitken Spence are both managers of resorts and hotels. You are also asset managers. You own large assets in these areas. So this is a completely different business. It's a very capital intensive business. You must be thinking about, you have to think about both aspects, operating the hotels, having a sharp product, and also maximizing your asset returns. What is particularly, we don't see that, we don't talk about that side of the business, the asset management side of the tourism business, the owning the hotels, upkeep and developing properties. What is challenging about that in this climate, and how do you think you can optimize your returns in that area?
I wouldn't agree that it's unattractive. The returns are perhaps lower than certain industries that are less capital intensive. If you look at our portfolio prior to COVID, our resort hotels in Sri Lanka, despite relatively low room rates, were getting a decent return on capital, double-digit return on capital. With the city hotels, the issue was, in particular with, say, Cinnamon Grand, is that it sits on 9 acres of freehold land, and the land gets revalued in the balance sheet, and that then expands the capital employed, and then getting a return on that is very challenging. So especially since the war ended, land prices have more than tripled, and the value of that asset in our balance sheet has increased significantly. So that has been a challenge. But having said that, rates even pre-COVID in Colombo was still low. If you look at the trends post-COVID in the rest of Asia, rates have gone up significantly. And given some of the things that the industry is trying to do in the city, including the entertainment aspect, there is an opportunity for rates to move up and returns to get better.
Parakrama, also, the same question to you. You are both an operator and owner of hotel properties, right? These are two vastly different businesses. One is an asset management business. The other is a hotel management business. What's the challenge on the asset management side of the business?
I think before I touch that, let me very briefly touch on the surge in the tourist arrivals. We need to understand that the numbers that have been dished out, a large portion is visiting friends and relations. But having said that, the numbers have in fact surged. And if you look at for this year ending December, as a country we were targeting $2.7 billion. I think the number is bound to fall by 10 or 20%, the receipts from tourist income. And the question of, my good friend Krishan will disagree with me. I also heard about the President talking about this subject as well. The minimum room rates, I don't want to comment on that because Krishan is here as well. But minimum room rates for city hotels, the issue is that are we sending the right message when the government gets involved in the pricing mechanism without leaving it to the market forces? Is it helping the cause of tourism in Sri Lanka? Is a question that I would like to pose as well. And having said that about the asset management, if you look at Sri Lanka, the source markets have changed to India and Russia by and large, unlike in the past, source markets. And the average room rates are fairly low. And as a result, we have an issue about proper yields. If the average room rates were high, then it's different. Just to give a simple example, we have a hotel in Ahungal which has got 501 rooms. right? So occupancy to break even is pretty high. So, and also these are, I mean, whether you like it or not, all these assets are debt driven. And we went through a era where the interest rates were almost hitting 27, 28, but now it's down, but it's still challenging. So to answer your question, unlike being a manager, when you own the asset and when you have to manage the asset, it's a huge challenge. Unless you have 70, 80% occupancy and pretty attractive average room rates. Thank you.
Mr. Hui, can I bring you in on something we were discussing a little while ago? It is about the setbacks that Sri Lanka has had with credibility on issues around investor credibility. You know, we've had occasions where the government has taken over private sector assets. We've had recently, due to the economic crisis, there were restrictions placed, and there was forced convertibility of dollar assets into rupees because the country was short of foreign currency. There was a context to this, but these were the outcomes, and this has hurt investor sentiment. Has Vietnam had to suffer similar challenges in its last 20 years in the journey that you were talking about?
Yeah, sure. I think that in the year 2011, Vietnam also faced the same challenge. And of course, what we do in the most important thing we do is try to recover the confidence in Vietnam. If every people lose the confidence in Vietnam, all the investment will withdraw. Nobody come. And then even though for the domestic, nobody try to enlarge the business. So at that time, we need to take the very painful policy on the business owner, on the company must pay the interest rate around